All right. So now this is just basically for us to remember, like, how on a daily basis we all interact with so many products, right? So if we trace our day from the morning when we wake up till the time we go to bed, we actually interact with hundreds of products. And some products are designed by, engineers, some by designers, and some by craftspeople. And at some level, some of the products that we use, they give us a little bit more joy compared to some other products. Okay. Uh, so now these products that give us joy, because that is one of the goals that we have here as a designer, to give the user or consumer a level of satisfaction, some happiness while using the product. So this level of happiness for different people may be different with while interacting with different products. It may not be the same. And there are several factors which, because of which this happens. So we will be discussing those. And especially for this reason, the context becomes very important. And this is the point which designer has to keep in mind while designing a product. And um, so when we're interacting with a product, because to do a certain activity or achieve certain daily goal, so we use a product while achieving that goal. And that interaction which we have with that particular product, if that interaction is good, if it is successful, so it makes our day better. If that interaction has some kind of flaws, or it is not of the optimum level, then that will not give us that kind of satisfaction in our life, productivity as well, and also general feeling of well-being. So we have to take into account ergonomics to ensure that this particular interaction between this product and ourselves is of the optimum level. And we will be looking at several examples throughout the presentation to kind of understand that a little bit better. So I will start here with this, first product that we all probably the first product we interact with in a day, which is our toothbrush. So, in the recorded history, before the toothbrush, there have been records which shows that how civilizations used products such as twigs or bird feathers or animal bones, etc., to use for oral hygiene. So excavations have really shown us these products that people have been using for centuries, uh, depending on culture to culture. Like, for example, in India, the neem twigs were used as a toothbrush, which we all are aware of. And the nylon bristles, they came much later and very recently, 1938. So, so there are so many components that let's take a look at maybe quickly at these components that, make the brush. So, for example, the bristles. Now, shifting to the nylon bristles, it contributed in the decrease of the bacteria on the surface of the toothbrush, right? So, not just that, but when we look at the handle of the brushes that we have available to us now, so there are straight handles, there are angled, curved, some have contours, they come with different types of grips, some are rubberized, some have different, patterns on them to kind of get a nicer grip. The bristles that we discussed earlier, they come in different softnesses. So one is very soft, hard, depending on the requirement and the sensitivity of the user and the preference as well. If we look at the head of the brush, the part with which we actually interact, the mouth interacts. So we have small heads, we have larger heads for adults, smaller for children. Uh, the heads are oblong, they are square, so they come in all different shapes and sizes. And now we have these powered brushes as well. So, which powers the head, so it vibrates or it rotates to achieve a better cleaning, basically. Much of research, so much of background is there in this product that, and it is still going on. It has not stopped. It is a continuous process here. If we talk about today, like today, I'm giving this presentation through online mode because of the pandemic. So I am using this kind of a mouse right now, which is a wireless, wireless, right? And a Bluetooth optical mouse. So it allows me to use it on any kind of surface. It allows me to, maintain a distance if I need to from my system, and a little more freedom when I am using this. If I were using this kind of a mouse, which was wired, it would have kind of restricted my movement a little bit. So I could not move around and give my presentation. Or when I'm working also, it would restrict it. And if we go a little bit, earlier, and we look at this model, which used to have this ball as in, for movement, then maybe using this kind of a mouse, which had no wheel here, and the buttons were used to click and move around, navigate in the various slides, it would probably be not a very pleasant experience. It would probably be a little bit frustrating for me to, move around and copy paste things. So we can see that how the interaction that as a user that I am having with a product right now, how it is like really facilitating and not hindering, my output. So which is really actually facilitating my output, and so much so that I am not even thinking about it. It's not my concern because it is not really adding to any kind of a problem while I am using it. So let us take a look at the term ergonomics, which has been made up of two words basically, and it's a Greek term. So ergon means work or labor, and nomos means laws. And human capabilities, a very short, basically definition, human capabilities in relationship with the work demands. And in Europe, we call it ergonomics. And in America, generally the term human factor engineering is used. But these both essentially mean the same thing. So the idea here is that how can designers reduce the effort made by the user and achieve the optimum results? So we will see and understand it from this example now. So we saw some examples from our daily life that probably we all use, like the toothbrush, like the mouse. But as a designer, we will probably not be designing only products that we use personally. Okay, so we have to design products for general public as well, who would be using it. So in that case, our own personal experience will not be there definitely. But in that case, we have to use our power of observation to really understand that what kind of problems the person is facing, and how can we, with our skills, improve this interaction and improve the overall experience of this person. So this is an image where, okay, all my image, mostly all of them are from the internet. And a lot of information is also, I will be like informing you if there is some website which you can later check on as well. So this laborer has been given, a task to break these stones into smaller pieces for construction purposes. Okay, so now let us see the components that are involved when this person is performing this particular activity. So we have the human, we have the hammer, which is the tool he is using. We have the ground and his environment, basically within which he is working. Okay, so these are the broad components. Now, to achieve our ultimate goal, which is maximum productivity, because this man is expected to, break a certain amount of stones in a day in order to get his payment. There must be some kind of a parameter, some kind of a protocol is there that he needs to finish in a day. And his, activity, or which will enable him to break the maximum amount of stones into smaller pieces in the shortest amount of time, we will have to specifically the handle of the hammer is of a lot of importance here, because if the hammer handle is too short, okay, if it is too short, then this person would have problem in holding it. He will have to bend down in order to use it. Okay, he will be required to use certain force in order to strike the stone. So this will hinder his overall output. All right. If the handle is, on the other hand, is longer, in that case, also the amount of force that is required, that would also be different if we apply the laws of physics. We know that if this handle is longer, how much force he would be required to exert. So here the uh, handle becomes a very important element. Now, any kind of repetitive motion, in this case, especially, it is even more important. But even when we are doing any kind of a repetitive motion in the kitchen also, or in while we are working on the computer, so that leads to something which is known as musculoskeletal injury. Uh, so repetitive actions, like if I'm using my mouse for too long, or anyone, so it can lead to carpal tunnel syndrome in the wrist, or it can lead to cervical pain if we are looking at the screen for too long and we are sitting for many hours. And especially when this person is required to really use his physical strength, at this time, the combining that with a poor, uh, tool, it really adds on to that chance of getting the musculoskeletal injury. So that is why the tool here becomes very important, and the designing aspect is highly, highly important. Now, the third element here is the environment in which he's working. So for this person, it is an outdoor environment. Now, if it is very sunny, it is a very hot weather, that will also bring down his productivity. He will not be very comfortable. If it rains, it will again hamper his performance. His hammer might slip on the stones, or he might have chances of slipping in the slurry that will be created by the rain. So it will also lead to him being tired very, very quickly. So all these things will of the environmental factor will also affect his productivity. And the other thing related to that is his own safety. So if he's using a kind of a tool which can harm him, which can he can hurt himself with it, like how he's putting his foot on the stone and a little slip and he hits his foot instead. So security protocols also become a very important part of it. So now we have seen the factors that which are really visible to us with our eyes. But there's another factor which is a hidden factor which we cannot see, and that is the psychological factor. Okay, so the psychological factor basically of the person, because in this entire system that we have seen so far, the only person who is a thinking, a walking, talking entity is the human being, right? And apart from his physical health and other things, his psychology also plays a very important role, and that is something which we cannot see, because he might be thinking about something, like if he had a argument in the morning, so his mood might be off, he might be worried about his relationship with the person he had a fight with, or if he did not get his salary because he was not well, how will he buy food for his home? So all these kind of worries that are going on in the background, so they will also affect his ultimate productivity, which is here the concern of the owner, the one who has hired him. So we can see that a simple task of breaking stone has so much of complexity involved in it, and each and every smaller component, each and every small component here plays a very important role when it comes to the performance and productivity of this person here. So now let us take a look at the definition of ergonomics given by the International Ergonomic Association. So ergonomics is the scientific discipline concerned with the understanding of interactions among humans and other elements of a system, and a profession that applies theory, principles, data, and methods to design in order to optimize human well-being and overall system performance. So let us break this definition into smaller parts and try to understand with respect to the example that we had just seen. So I have highlighted, if you can see, I have highlighted these three terms: interaction, elements of a system, and system performance. Okay, so if you recall the previous example that we saw, where we saw the man breaking the stone. So we know what is the interaction. That is basically the interaction between the man and the stone with the help of the tool. We also saw all the elements of the system. Okay, so we had the man, the tool, the work environment, and his psychology or his cognitive capability. So these comprise the elements of a system. Okay, and the third is the system performance or the objective that is to be fulfilled, basically. And the main objective here is to improve the interaction, which will basically ultimately improve the system performance. So if we improve this interaction between the man and the tool, it would mean faster work output and no loss to the company. So that means better system performance. So here we can see in the second one that ergonomics is a design. So basically the interaction that we saw between the man and the tool is basically the design aspect, that how do we design the tool so that the interaction improves. It's a simpler definition of the original one that we saw here. And this is basically the, what ergonomists contribute. Now, if we have to improve this interaction, okay, so that is the question basically, right? That how do we improve this interaction? Because we have a lot of elements here that we saw. So, so how do we do that is that we have to ensure that all the elements that are in this system, they are all updated. So for example, if we look at the physical health, all right, so that is one thing, that the person has to be healthy. The person has to be trained, because if we ask someone who has no training to break the stone, that person would not really know which exact muscle to apply or how to hold the hammer or in which direction to apply the force. But with proper training, the trained person can actually do a much better job, much faster job. So training becomes very important. When we talk about the environment of the person where he's working, so if he's provided water, if he's provided food, or breaks in between, so that will help him kind of regain his strength a little bit, and that would enhance his environment, work environment. Also the safety that we talked earlier, that how it is so unsafe, it can be unsafe, he may hurt himself. So there should be some safety protocols also in place so that he doesn't injure himself. Or if he does, then how can he quickly recover from those injuries? And also, does he get enough breaks so he can take care of his personal concerns, because that is going on in his psychology. So it's going on in his head. So some time that he can give to his personal issues, because ultimately we are trying to modify this interaction between the man and the machine to improve the performance of the overall system. Okay. So the advantages, like we just saw, that if we improve this interaction uh, and make the environment safe, so this person becomes comfortable, he gets more comfort while he is doing his activity. If his tool has been improved, it is sharp, the handle is correct, he will be able to use it and hold it in a much better way. Also, when his safety measures are incorporated, he will be, mentally, he will be feeling much better, much safer about it. So his comfort, safety, everything is taken care of, which will help in his productivity or his performance. So now, where he used to take maybe double the time to perform an activity, so now he's taking maybe half the time and doing double the work. So he's achieving more in the same amount of time, and he's not physically and mentally fatigued. So his productivity and performance will also increase. And lastly, the aesthetics, which is basically uh, the visual appearance of the product that we are interacting with. So in this case, because we all, like all humans, have a very subjective preference. So we, depends on the choice of color, depends on material. We have so many particular peculiar choices. All right, and uh, when the product is visually pleasing, so it gives us that happiness. We'll talk about this happiness in detail also a little bit later. So the product should be aesthetic, so that it also adds to the joy of using the product. So all these basically have to work together, and these are basically the overall advantages that we will get if the product uh, is optimum and all the components of the system are working together in tandem. So now let us take a look at the types of ergonomics. So broadly speaking, there are physical ergonomics, cognitive ergonomics, and there is an organizational ergonomics. But organizational ergonomics also is kind of an amalgamation of physical and cognitive. So I will be focusing more on these two so that we understand the concepts of the ergonomics. So physical ergonomics deals with the physical load on the human body when performing activities like work, sports, jobs, at home, dealing with products. Um, Now, when we're talking about physical ergonomics, so you all may have heard of the term physiology or physiological stress. Now, when we are using a product, uh, if we are familiar with that product, if we have been using that product for some time, okay, uh, that uh, that is one situation where we know how to use it. But when we are new to a product, we may not know how to use this product very well, right? So that incorrect use of using that product may lead to some physiological stress. So if, it could be a simple product, it could be a more complex activity, but if we are not using it the way it is supposed to be used, we may cause ourselves some kind of physiological stress. Now, this stress can be seen. So it is visible through our body reaction and our expression. So we will probably make a face or some kind of indication we will give that it is causing us some kind of discomfort. And there are also ways to measure this physiological stress, like our heart rate, our uh, our sweat pattern, and there are many other tools which can tell us about our physiological stress that a product is causing us. So this is when we are using a product incorrectly. But when a product is designed poorly, okay, when we are using such a product which is designed in a very poor manner, which has not considered the factors that we discussed earlier, that is automatically going to give us stress. Okay, so the man or the human being, whoever is using it, will have to make some extra effort to use that product, and that will affect our physiology. So now where, and this again brings us back to the training, because training is one aspect, especially when it is to do with industry or products that are used by certain people who have to use a lot of their physical energy is used there. So their training and how often do we use a product, that helps in improving the skill. And so we can see this better with this example here. On the left, we see this Sherpa, a Nepalese Sherpa, who is carrying this load up on the mountains. He's helping these mountain climbers carry their, the things that they carry with them. So this load, which we can see visually also that it is pretty heavy, and along with that, he's also climbing a snow-clad mountain. So it is a difficult terrain. It has slopes, and slopes that are not even sure that where is a slope. There could be snow, it could be slippery. So all these things are there, and added to that, he's carrying this load. On the right here, we can see these women. They are working on this, cutting this grass, but they are doing so while they are standing on this little hill. So their posture is a little compromised. In both these cases, both these groups are actually trying to also maintain their body balance, okay, while they are carrying on this task, which is using their physical capability. So now, as designers, how do we help them carry on these with these tasks with little or no strain? So that is the job for the designer. And how do we solve these problems that they are facing here? So the appropriate design and the correct method of operation will reduce this physiological stress and will increase their performance. Like for example, for mountain climbing, there are many equipments, there are many designs. Like you can see how he's holding this load. He's supported on his head, taking the help of his head. So there are many such products which help distribute the load evenly on the body. Even apart from the Sherpa, all our soldiers who have to go on to these, high hills, they have to carry their guns, they have to carry their backpacks with their essential items, ammunition, and all. So they also are in the similar situation where they carry around 50, 60 kilos of load on their back while fighting with the enemy. So it is imperative to really find solutions for these groups that are actually using their body beyond the capability that a normal human body has. Um, so, like if we are doing any kind of activity in a new environment, for example, we are working in a new kitchen, okay, in a new house. So at first, we may not be able to adjust with, for example, the kitchen counter height or the storage that we have. But over time, we kind of get used to it over a few months. And then after a few years, we really feel that, the kitchen is fine. There's no problem with it. Uh, but if the counter height or the storage units or any other, design element of the kitchen is not conducive to our physiology, then we would continue to be stressed in that situation without even realizing it. So that is the kind of stress that we see not in these kind of high demanding areas, but even in our daily lives around us. And it is really important to also identify those areas where the person may have gotten accustomed to or may have gotten used to, but the environment or the product is still continuing to add stress on that person, which is leading to much more dangerous or bigger physiological problems, like I mentioned a few earlier, like carpal tunnel or uh, cervical or any kind of pains, knee pain and other things. Okay, so when we talk about ergonomics, the workstation or the workplace is one of the main areas for discussion. And but I will not go in detail in this area because this information is already available very very easily. A lot of work has been done on it. We already have a lot of uh, uh, what should be the height, the angle of the computer, where should the hand be. All that information is readily available to us. So if you're interested, you can just go and check that. But I would want to discuss this interesting product, which is the Aeron chair. And this is one of the first chairs. Now, we are very familiar with this chair nowadays. We see it in our offices, in our homes. But this is one of the first chairs that was designed in 1992, and it was designed for Herman Miller. So Herman Miller basically conducted a research on how people sit, okay, as compared to how they should sit. So there is a difference between the two, that how they are sitting, but how they should be sitting. So he conducted that experiment, that exercise, the research, and then he came up with the idea of the chair, that to design a chair that would provide comfort without the user even realizing it, without him even being aware. So, if any one of you is, I don't know, from the management background, or if you're aware of uh, management area, you may have heard of the Kano method. So, in the Kano method, there are four types of user needs. And one of those needs is the latent need. Now, latent need is a need which is not apparent, which is not, uh, you know, maybe a user will not be able to say that I need this if you ask a user. But if that is missing from the product, then the user will immediately, then the user would immediately realize. We would say that this product is not good. It's not really working for me. So I will give a very small example quickly. Like, for example, the table that we sit on, and it has a footrest. So the piece which connects the legs of the table. So when we sit, we place our feet on that little footrest. We can place them on the floor. We can place them on the footrest. We can change the position depending on our comfort. But if that footrest is missing from the table, then suddenly there is no place for us to keep our feet, but only the ground, only the floor. So that is one example that is from my personal experience. Like for me, that is my latent need. For all of us, we have many such latent needs which are hidden, which we can't see. So this is the similar thing that Herman Miller wanted to give to the users, that people should, or the user should get the comfort without even being aware of the comfort. So it should be like this invisible kind of a thing when he's using this chair. So this chair has many different features, like in the body, three sizes to fit all body sizes. Controls can be used while a person is sitting here. Material also is unique. Armrests can be adjustable. So there are various, other salient points that make this chair interesting. But one of the main things is, again, that the chair should become invisible. Now let's come to the cognitive ergonomics. So this is basically the definition by the Interaction Design Foundation. And under cognitive ergonomics, there are several domains like mental workload, decision making, skill performance, and one of the first areas where they uh, investigated cognitive ergonomics was nuclear power plants, air traffic control. So these were very complex work environments which demanded a lot of attention from the person who's using these, and they're very complex. Later on, they have been used in much simpler areas like banking, because as a banker, one needs to count the money. He should not give more. He should not give less. So this becomes very imperative to even so-called softer domains. Okay. Uh, so the ultimate goal here is to making products that are simple, clear, and easy to use, and they ensure safety and a quick response time. That is very important because cognition basically is our mental processes, mental activity. So, how quickly our brain is able to react in a given situation. So we can see with this example here, this is an example of control board. So uh, while operating something, maybe an accident is happening. Maybe this is the crane which is picking some rubble, but it has accidentally picked up a human being, for example. How quickly can this person who's working on this, uh, this board here, how quickly can he help out the person who's in need when an accident is taking place? How would he quickly know that which button needs to be used? Okay, so all these are very important when it comes to the cognitive part. Uh, how do we, organize these buttons? So now, like here, we can see that they have been organized in some way that similar buttons are, placed in similar location. But again, at the same time, the design of the buttons itself, that which one should be pressed, which one should be pushed, which one should be rotated. Uh, are we going to use one finger? Are we going to use multiple fingers? Are we going to use the whole hand? Can we use both our hands simultaneously? Or will a particular function require one hand only? Or does it need combination? So, all these things, because of course, physical reaction is also required here, but it all depends on how quickly the brain is able to tell the physical body part to act in a certain way. So this becomes really important here. Um, so now this is an even more complex system. So this, not only does a person have to uh, think quickly or press some buttons, but he or she may also be required to walk and run to the other board if required. Um, so when we have the cognitive functioning is required to be of the optimum level, whether it is a switchboard situation or whether it is any other product also which requires the brain to be employed while we are using it, then there are a few things that need to be kept in mind. Okay, so one is that the design features should motivate the user to use the product. If the design features are so poorly designed that the user is not even motivated to act on it, that user will ultimately lose, interest, and he will just throw the product aside. I will not use it. There are better products in the market. So the first thing is that the design, with the help of design, we have to motivate the user to actually, you know, feel himself to actually use the product. The other thing is that the design should help in attention and alertness, especially required in these high pressured jobs that we just discussed. That the mental alertness uh, needs to be there. The attention span, uh, has to be, maintained there, right? The third is that the design feature should facilitate the decision making skills of the person who's using it. Okay, so which decision to take, which button to press, maybe the steps, if there are more than one steps, how can the design help the user know that, which how to proceed in a particular fashion? So design can help in that. The next thing is very interesting. It is from the basically visual principles of design background, which is the figure ground relationship. So now here we can see that we have a background and then we have some buttons. So what is helping us see the difference between the background and the foreground is the color and the shape here. Now, if the buttons were the same color as the background, it would be very difficult for the user to really know where is the button, what to press. Again, now the color can also be used. It is also can tell the hierarchy in which the buttons are arranged. For example, you can see some buttons are white, some have some yellow instructions, some are black here, some are red here. So maybe there is also, a series or the functions of the buttons as per the color coding here. So that also helps that maybe red should be used only when there is a very emergency situation, and also the placement is such that not everyone can use it, because if an organization is working, some campus, institutional campus is working, and there is a power hub is there, and somebody turns it off by mistake, everybody's work will suffer. So these mistakes, how to kind of discourage these? So maybe somebody should not press something accidentally, then maybe the placement, maybe the color can help one understand that. And also what we saw earlier, the grouping, that how we can group similar functions together. Okay, so now this is another interesting example. I hope you can read this text. I will just read it out. So this is basically a traditional British train carriage door. And so now when a person is traveling, so on the top of the door, he will see this message, which says to open the door, wait for this sign, which will say door unlocked. So when the message appears, then open the window. So this person, you can see he has pushed the window down. Use outside handle, which is here, because there is no door handle on the inside. And once you have opened, you alight, and please also close door and window after use. Now, if someone is traveling, in this train for the first time, or somebody who is from some other country who cannot read English, so he doesn't know what this whole thing means. Now, that person would be left in a situation of panic and frustration, because he would look around for a button or a handle inside, but he would not find that. Right. So it would be a situation which will really disturb his mental balance, because he will miss his station. So, so this is a situation which kind of involves both our cognitive faculties and also our physical faculties. And this is basically known as the Pokayok. So it is a speed hump, basically, which provides an extra step to avoid accidental opening. And this Pokayok is a Japanese term, which basically means that designing a product in such a way to make it less usable, so that it deters the user from using it except when it is vital. Now, of course, this is important because children may accidentally open the door, but there might be a better way to go about it, rather than making it so complex for a person. Because now here the person's height may also be important. A person who's short may not be able to open the window also. So all these things will just lead to unnecessary stress. So of course now we have trains that open automatically the doors, so that is helpful. So this is now the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think we all are aware of it. And this shows that we have psychological needs, safety needs, belonging, friendship, family. We have some self-esteem needs. And then finally, we have self-actualization. So we can see that in this self-actualization area, we have creativity, we have problem solving activity here, which is basically what designers or engineers usually do. So this is here on the top. And interestingly, this is the space which actually helps all the four areas in the bottom: the physiological, the safety, belonging, esteem. So, this creativity and problem solving ability actually helps us achieving the basic needs that a human has. And at some point or the other, we all display some design skills in order to make our lives easier. Now, these are some images I got from the internet, some Indian hacks or jugards, like we call it. So we can see here a teacher, how she has, hung her phone with the help of a hanger, and how it is suspended, from the ceiling. And so her students can watch her while she's solving a problem on the blackboard. And here the teacher has used the tray from her refrigerator, which is a glass tray, and she has propped it up on these two boxes. And she is writing below, and the camera is capturing and communicating to her students. So there are like hundreds and hundreds of examples. The Indians are known to be problem solvers. Uh, you know, Jugaad is like this. You know, uh, Basically it means design, problem solving. So we all have solved some problem. Like for example, a very simple problem that we face every day of the charger being shorter than the height of the point to the floor or the table. So how do we, charge our phone? Or someone having a problem of the seat being uncomfortable, or how to carry more than one child a little bit more comfortably, or how to use this mosquito coil uh, when the actual, this device doesn't allow us to use it, or when we know when we are required to use more than one, or even the basic need here of hygiene, and also some privacy. So we can see that how people have used these simple daily everyday life products to solve some simple problems. So I will just very quickly discuss the history of ergonomics. There's a long, vast history uh, influenced by art, design, management, military. But I will just very quickly take everyone through the main people who have been instrumental in really getting us to where we are. So, uh, so the first person who's really actually who coined this term ergonomics was a Zastrabowski. So he's the one who in 1857 came out with his book, An Outline of Ergonomics. This is the first time we had this term. And he conducted studies on laws of work. And since then, we know these terms like user focused and user friendly. These are the terms that we know uh, till date because of Zastrabowski's contributions. Uh, Next person is American mechanical engineer Frederick Winslow Taylor. So he's the first man in the recorded history who said that systemic observation and study is really important for work output. And he summed up his efficiency techniques in his book, which is titled The Principles of Scientific Management. It came out in 1910 or 1911, I think. And his scientific management techniques consisted of mainly four principles. So all four are like equally important, but this is the time basically of the assembly line era, where there used to be assembly line and the workers used to assemble all the components together. So two of the important things that he said was that train uh, the employee. So train him for the job rather than let him train himself. Okay, so that is like really important, and today also it is considered very important. And another thing that he said was divide the work equally, so that the managers do what they do best and workers do what they do best, rather than each of them doing each other's work and the efficiency being low. Divide the work equally. So these were some important contributions. uh, the next important couple were actually Frank Gilbreth and Lillian Gilbreth, between 1920s and 1940s. So they basically developed the time and motion study and efficiency, and they were efficiency experts. So they both were inventors of motion study, and they pioneered the use of short films to watch how industrial processes work and how office tasks were done. So they used to watch these films, and then they used to break them down into smaller components, and then they used to find solutions on how to make the job faster. So Frank basically started his career as a bricklayer. So basically, one has to lay a number of bricks in a day in order to get their salary. So he observed the other bricklayers and he noticed that the way they were picking up the brick and putting mortar and placing it, the whole process was too lengthy, too time taking. So he minimized these number of steps required. So now the when a person used to lay around 1,000 bricks in a day, with his method, now he could lay around 3,000 bricks a day. So it increases efficiency. And later he became an industrial engineer, and he understood or studied this process further in detail. He designed several products that would aid in bricklayers achieve their maximum output. And he also interestingly developed a procedure where uh, we have seen in films also, where the doctor turns to the nurse and the nurse hands over an equipment to the doctor. So that saves the doctor's time rather than doctor himself going to the table, picking up the scissor or any other item. Now he just holds his hand out and the nurse gives him, and that in turn allows him to perform the surgery faster and save the life faster. Um, Now, Lillian actually had a PhD in psychology, and she combined her experience of of working in the kitchen along with her psychology background. And this is a time when the refrigerator was newly arriving in the market. And before that, they used to use these ice boxes to keep the items cold. So she noticed that when the ice box used to be used, a woman would use 50% of her time in the kitchen. So she wanted to decrease that time of the woman being used in the kitchen and to use it at some other place, maybe get a rest and not work half the day. So she performed several experiments. She baked a cake in different types of kitchen layouts, and she counted the steps used in all of those different layouts, and she reduced the number of operations from 97 to 64, and she reduced the number of steps from 281 to 45. So she greatly reduced the number of operations and the steps to really reduce the total uh, time that is required by someone to work in the kitchen. And she used a term called circular routing, so that how to place activities in such a way that you can circularly move around them. So your movement is kind of aiding in a faster work output. And that is nowadays we know it as work triangle. So which comprises of refrigerator, the work surface, countertop, and the washing area, the cooking. So all these three is a work triangle. Again, the triangle means that you're moving in that triangle and your efficiency is increased. So ergonomics has a huge role to play in the area of aviation as well. And so this is basically uh, like when earlier when there was a Boeing aircraft. Uh, so now this is the yoke or kind of a joystick which a pilot uses to move right or left, front or back, to move it in that direction where he moves. He wants to move the plane. So earlier, the design was such that if the pilot would pull this towards himself, the plane would go in the downward direction, and if he would push it away from him, it would go in the upward direction. So now, in a state of panic, when there is suddenly the clouds clear up and there is a mountain in front, the human the human body response would just be to pull this lever and kind of uh, you know move away from the mountain and try to move the plane away from the mountain. But because the design was such that when you pull it, the plane goes down, so it would actually cause more crashes. So when the engineers and designers found that this is the reason, they actually replaced the function that now when you pull it, it moves up, and when you push it, it moves down. So this is just a small example, but over time, many of these ergonomics principles have been used to make the pilot more comfortable. Even you can see here the panel that he has, a lot of cognitive tasks are involved here. So how to make all these things also easier uh, for the pilot to use. So now let's see that how do we integrate the ergonomics in the design process. I'm going a little bit fast, sorry, because I can see the time is less, and I lost a bit of time initially. So this is here Simon Personal Communicator, which was basically the first mobile phone ever, which came out in 1994. But this also failed as quickly as it came up. Um, so if we, you know, understand this product, now this product actually was very futuristic in a way, because it had, you know, uh, telephone directory, it had map, it had stocks, it had a lot of features actually, which maybe some of the newer phones also have. But if you look at the size of it and the design of it, it's not something that would really would attract us or would want us to possess it. Okay, uh, even if we put in all the best features in it and give it a very nice battery life, reduce the cost, it's very doubtful that any one of us would actually want to really, uh, you know, own this product. If we look at this iPhone here on this left side, okay, so iPhone, to be honest, if we look at the from the angle of the features that it provides us, it provides us with very few actually extra features that any other competitive brand provides. So all these cheaper brands also give us a lot of these functions. But what is it about the iPhone that really attracts the consumer? That one wants iPhone 5, then 6, then 7, then 10, and I don't know which model is going on in the market right now. But what is it that really, the consumer wants to own the, iPhone? So, so there must be something about it, right? There must be some feature, of course, that really makes it so desirable amongst the consumer. So maybe let us take a look at some of those features that make this product so desirable. So one is the functionality of this. So now this is one of the first products that came up with this glass uh, screen, a complete glass screen, very simple, very minimalistic, no clutter. Uh, Very functional. You press and you can dial a number. Um, the buttons also, we can see the buttons are symmetrically placed on the phone. Very easy to access, very easy to use. Of course, it's very aesthetically pleasing, nice, sleek looking phone. A lot of options when it comes to colors and other things, lightweight, thin. Uh, Producibility or manufacturability is also very easy. Okay. And but mainly here is the psychological aspect that we feel kind of a triumph when we own this phone because it has that kind of a status amongst all the other phones that is there. So but apart from this psychological aspect, because it is an expensive phone and Apple and other things, it is mainly uh, the usefulness of the product, that it is it's so easy to use, so useful, so sleek, that makes it a good product. So today when we see products around us, okay, so we have like hundreds of products and we have a variety of products available to us at any given point of time. There are so many products, so many companies coming up with, for example, this smartwatch. Hundreds of smartwatches in the market, but still they are producing more every day. Hundreds of already products we have, still they are coming up every day. So why is that happening? Why are there so many products? And why this industry is booming? The reason is that we as consumers, we as human beings, we like new things. That is a psychological, basically, reason, and we cannot change it. A lot of us cannot change it. So we like new things. New products make us happy. They give us joy. They give us happiness. And sometimes the product may not offer us everything, okay, but still, because we have been uh, looking at that product for so long, we have been wanting it for so long, for some reason, so we tend to also do away with those points which are not being offered by that product. But again, we have to ask that at what cost, uh, you know is for that likeness for that product. So if a product matches our aspirations, our needs, if it is compatible to our body, if this fits my wrist, if my fingers are comfortable in using it, this pen, for long duration of time, if I can clip it on my backpack or any other clothing, if it is of my size, if it matches my behavior, then it is a good product, then it will give me happiness and I would want to get that product. So let us quickly take a look at some products and some important aspects from the ergonomic point of view. So one important human need is the convenience of the product. So now this is an example of a cell phone which has a cover, it has a button. So if I have to use this phone, if it is ringing, I have to unlock it, open the flap, and then receive my call. So will this kind of hamper my ability to use this phone quickly? Would I want my phone to be a single hand operation, or I will compromise based on the looks of how it looks? That is one thing. On the right, we have a nail cutter. Now, again, is this a single handed operation, or do I need my other hand to open this, flip it, and then I can use single hand? Can elderly people use it? Can somebody with arthritis use this product? That is a question. Now, this is an example of how the product gives us the way of learning facility. So, this child here is trying to operate a machine. So, this machine, whether we are using it for the first time, okay, or if we are an experienced user, the experience will be different for both these kind of users. So now here two things are important. One thing is the usability aspect. So usability is that how quickly can we understand to operate the product, how quickly we understand the functions. And the second is the reusability. So I have learned to use a particular product, but after a gap of some time, if I have to again use that product, how quickly will I be able to retrieve that information that I have in my brain? And how can I reduce this relearning time to use this product? So that is a very important aspect of any product. So a calculator, how quickly can I recall how to use it? Or this game Ludo, how quickly can I recall? Or will it need me to look at some pamphlet, read some instructions? So it is a very important aspect, usability first and reusability, really important. The next is that we also use not only for learning or for our work, but we also use design for our enjoyment or for our amusement. So now, if this child wants to play, this swing, he wants to use this swing. So there are several factors which will be from the safety point of view, from behavior point of view of the child. That does his body dimension match it? Can he sit here? Can he hold the swing? Will he be able to hold his head, his body posture? Okay, so of course, this child will not fit here. Can he use this game, Ludo? Would he know the steps? Maybe not. So he would just give up this product. He would not enjoy this, neither this nor this. So we have to design something keeping in mind this consumer's capability, that what will give him enjoyment. Something that gives me enjoyment on this swing or this Ludo will not necessarily give him the same enjoyment. So that is really important when we are considering the design process. So now this product that we see here is a cutter. We use it to open our Amazon packages and other things. But this can also be used to kill a person. It has a sharp edge. Somebody's Somebody can be injured seriously also, can be used as a weapon if we want. So among these two aspects, one which is helpful, cutting things for our daily use, other killing someone. So which aspect is to be highlighted? So now the context comes here, which is very important, that how do we market this product? Because we don't want to people to run away from this product. Or even the kitchen knife, because kitchen knife can cut vegetables, it can also kill. So how do we market this product? How do we design it in such a way that it has those features which tells that yes, it is it is dangerous, but yes, we have this safety lock. This can completely go inside the packaging, so it will not stick out, and several other features. At the same time, it also should warn that yes, even after all that, the danger is still there. This is still a dangerous equipment, right? So this learning has to be communicated with our products, and especially products that can actually be dangerous. So this is another important aspect. So we have seen the need of the user, how it is very important. We have seen the product has to be usable. The comfort of the person is very important, and the context where we will use it, again, very important. So now these are some of the examples. Like this is an example of a energy bar. Okay, so here this is an example of a good concept because it is transparent. It is showing the consumer that what it is selling and what the consumer is getting. It is not hiding anything. So the user can trust this brand. So this is basically a relationship building exercise where the brand is building a trust with the consumer so that the consumer will again come and buy his product. The product also should have low manufacturing cost. This is dental floss. Now, this is a single piece of plastic And here the property of plastic has been used, which can be used as a hinge. So there are no other extra components. One single piece, becomes the product itself. So how can we bring the manufacturing cost lower? And also the wow factor, that we look at the product and we go wow, and that suddenly just pulls us towards it. We may or may not buy it, depending on the specifications, but at least it has done the job of attracting our attention out of all the available products. So a good design solves problems, provides needs and pleasure, and poor design gives rise to rest. Just a little bit of summing up of how we can simply put it when it comes to design. So we have seen, uh, when it comes to design of the product, there are three things that are very important, which is aesthetics, the functionality and reliability, and also the compatibility. Because uh, there are so many designs in the market available to us that it makes it very difficult sometimes for us to make a choice that which one should we go for, right? So these things are really important for us to look at. So for example, let me just yeah. Okay, so first is the aesthetics that we discussed. So aesthetics basically are a set of psychological preferences that every human has, that what a product looks like, how it feels. It can be my personal aesthetic, preference. I like this sofa, but two of my family members may not like this sofa. They want something else. We have to go then with the majority. So then the product also has to be, kept in mind when we are marketing it, that a group may like it or a single person may like it, and how to market this. Next is the functionality and reliability, that how it is used, for how long it is used, the material selection. So how do I wear it? Will it come in contact with water? For example, this watch, will the components go bad? How much maintenance it requires, charging, how much cleaning it requires. If it stops working, can it be replaced? Can it be, fixed? All these things. So these are the functionality and reliability. The product has to be reliable. If I'm working out and if this is not giving me the right heart rate, then this product is useless for me because it is showing me the wrong data here. So then the trust is lost. Then the next is the compatibility. The third is the compatibility. So which basically is both aesthetics and the functionality depend on this compatibility, which basically means the affordability with the human being. Is it compatible with my body? Is it compatible with my height, with whatever that product interacts with, my wrist or my ears or anything else like that? Is it affordable? Is it sustainable? Can it go on without external support? So all these questions would be in the mind of the user. So these are the three important legs when on which the whole design kind of rests. Now, if I am a user, consumer, I have to buy a mixer grinder. Okay, this is my exercise. I'm going to the shop. I go into the shop and I directly move to the section where they have kept uh, these products. And then out of all these models and maybe more, I just move to one of the products. And then I call the guy who helps out in the store and ask for the specifications. Okay, and then I will see whether the number of jars, the handle, the lid, and other things. But I moved to this product first. Why did I move to this product first? Why did I not go to this one? So there was some kind of a, some exercise going on in my mind. There was some kind of uh, mm, some calculation, some kind of reaction was going on in my mind, because of which I moved to this particular product. So if this reaction which was going on in my mind, which led or forced literally my body to move towards this product, to actually go and touch it and get more information on it. If we are able to, you know, get an insight that what really happened in my mind, if the one who's designing these products, if he gets that insight, that will help him design the product that I need and that I will move towards and that I will buy, and that will ultimately maybe point towards a product being more successful. Of course, not as an individual, but what the group wants, what the majority of people want. So this internal and external trigger, this is really important for the designer, because the client is the person who's marketing it, but designer is someone who's going to give the final product to the person who is producing it. So as a designer, I have to understand the internal external triggers of the consumer, and that will help me to come up with better competitive designs, and that product will have more chances of being sold. um, so this is a simple definition of design, that it is a continuous problem solving process with conversion of idea into physical form, empathizing with the user. This is a very important term which actually differentiates uh, engineering design with product design. This is the term which does that, because an engineer ensures that the product is working, everything is working smoothly, but the designer or the product designer also brings in the point of view of the user, his anthro, uh, his compatibility, all those points here. So that's the small difference between the industrial design and the engineering design. uh, Now I will just very quickly, I'll just take 5 minutes and just share with you some good designs, some positive designs that have really worked in the past quite well, and also what was the brief that was given. So this is a kettle designed by Michael Graves in 1985, and the requirement was to design a kettle which was really playful and which had a whistle. So the designer has used these pure basic shapes, like a cone, this circle here, and there is that learning that I mentioned earlier. The learning is given here in this product with the help of color. So you can see here that these two red beads are there, and then we have a blue handle. Now, the red color denotes danger, hot, right? Like fire is red, orange. So this denotes hot. And blue color denotes water or air, which is for cool, something which is cool. So it is telling the user that this area is cool, but beyond this, these red dots, everything is hot. And especially the whistle, because the steam will come out of here. So this product is also helping the user learn, visually learn about this product. Of course, there are other things, ornamentation and other things that make it a nice product to use. Also, the base you can see is wider, so that even if there is less amount of hot water, it will not topple over, because it is also a product that can cause injury, like the knife that we had seen earlier. It can burn someone. If a child is playing and he just, if it goes off balance, the water will flow out, somebody can burn. So this is one example. The other is the angled measuring cup. So basically, now instead of holding the cup, bringing it up to the eye level or bending down to see where is, at what level is our item inside the cup, they have given this, angled elliptical ramp type of a system, where one can stand from top also, they can see that where is the level of the water or whatever is the content of the mug. So this helps in, as the designer says, eliminates the up and down gymnastics associated with achieving a precise measurement. So rather than moving up and down on the counter to read it, one can just stand And like I mentioned, the musculoskeletal injuries by doing repetitive exercise. For example, somebody working in a bakery or anywhere where they use mugs a lot, so that can be avoided. The next is this Clear RX pill bottle, which is basically designed to, uh, you know, take care of the problem that came out in the research that 60% people take wrong medication. So, and rather than missing, they take wrong medication, they eat something else, and that can be dangerous in some cases. So this bottle was designed keeping in mind to avoid that. So the bottle is not round because the reading the label sometimes becomes very difficult when the bottle is round. So it has a flat face on both sides. On top, it has uh, the name of the medicine in bold, and then the hierarchy becomes smaller and smaller depending on what is the information that is to be read or more important for the user. The sides are transparent, so we can see how many pills are remaining. The grips are there, and they also gave these color coded rings here. So in a family of 3 or 4 people, so they each can have a different colored ring, so they can identify their bottle and not get mixed up. And this is a product which is uh, our product, an Indian product, and till date, no other product has been able to beat our product in the area of prosthetics. So this is a product which came out of an accident. So, like we saw examples of Jugaad, this is something of that kind of background, wherein this Ram Chandra basically is an Indian sculptor, and he was hired by Dr. P.K. Sethi uh, to teach art at a polio victims hospital, local hospital. So Ramchandra, who was a sculptor who used to make these sculptures, he noticed that while using, these prosthetics made by international companies, amputees were not liking them. They were rejecting these prosthetics. So he had been thinking about this alternative for a long time. And one day, while he was riding his cycle, it got punctured. So he went to the repair person to rethread the tire, and then he noticed that the man used a vulcanized rubber to fix the hole in the cycle. And this is a local material. And so he thought that maybe that can be used instead and as a foot for amputees. And even local people know how to work on it. So he discussed this with Dr. P.K. Sethi, and he refined his idea, and he designed the foot as per the Indian requirements. That is, walking barefoot. That is why it looks like a foot. Also, aesthetically, it looks like a foot, so a person feels better about it also. And it also allowed for the mobility. Like, in India, people sit on the floor. Uh, so it's very different from the Western culture where they sit on the table or a chair. They don't sit on the floor as such. In India, the Indian toilet is used. Western toilet is not used as much in the rural areas, villages. So, keeping all those things in mind, they designed this foot, and the Western prosthetic foot or leg would cost around $8,000, and this Jaipur foot costs around $30. So, that is a drastic drop. And not just that, uh, in India, whenever someone needs this prosthetic foot, this is supplied free of cost to anyone who needs this foot, and it takes them a day to fit a person. There's a whole process. There is a very nice video on this on YouTube. This time is short, so I'm not showing it here, but you all, if interested, can go to YouTube and type this Jaipur foot. There's a long video, very nice video, shows the whole process at how a person visits and what are the steps, how they create the mold and how they fit it, the person with it. There are examples of people who are actually riding a bicycle, who are running after being, fit with this foot. So a product that we all can be really proud of. So this actually brings me to the end of my presentation, and I will just show one or two more. Basically, when it comes to translating our work into something more tangible, like how can we do this kind of research in ergonomics? So this is basically a work done by one of my students uh, who did a study in the Indian kitchen. um, she did a survey, collected data, primary, secondary, and studied the kitchen spaces. That what are how the Indian people behave in the kitchen. What are the different heights that are required for the Indian people, and she designed some alternate, designs for the same. This has been published in Taylor and Francis. And when it comes to when we say uh, quantitative, so one is qualitative, the other is quantitative. How to quantify our results? So we have these 16 channel based system and FSR sensors. And in this study, we studied the elderly people. And again, in the Indian kitchen, and we were trying to see that what is the kind of uh, pressure profile that develops when an elderly as compared to a younger person is using the different or accessing the different heights in the kitchen, so different counter heights. So so we saw that at toe on the medial foot, that how in different situations force suddenly peaks, and which is not really a very healthy way, especially for elderly, because it can lead to a lot of stress on their feet. And lastly, this is another work by one of my students who, during the pandemic situation, considering the pandemic situation, we took up the work of how to design some mobile kitchen counters. So for makeshift centers where people are in isolation, or even in homes, or for elderly people. So there was a long process actually, wherein we started with interviewing people and getting information, long process, and then coming up with some design, some iterations, of course, keeping in mind the different heights and other things, and some models of how the components will work, and the final rendering. So the idea was that this small kitchen should be able to accommodate all that a person really requires, one or two people, uh, at just a hand's distance, that it doesn't have to really reach very odd heights and odd places to really achieve those, carry out the tasks. So yeah, with that, I will end my presentation. uh, Thank you. Let me just turn on my camera once again. Oh, how? Okay, sorry. Stop sharing. Yeah. So I hope that was helpful. I can see some people were actually putting in some questions while I was speaking. I saw. Um,
Yes, ma'am. There is one question Dr. Pramod Kumar is asking that one need to learn psychology and physiology to be an ergonomic designer. Is it
yeah.
required to
So
have knowledge of both?
yeah. So ergono yeah. So ergonomists who are specifically who are working in the field of ergonomics, or they have specifically in a particular situation, they may need uh, knowledge of physiology and psychology. So uh, some level of understanding is required, but one does not need to be a psychologist to be a designer who would work in the area of ergonomics, right? So but yes, a little bit of understanding of how the human psychology works, and how the physiology works, a little bit of understanding or knowledge of that is there, which is required. A lot of people with background in physiology, you would see, are working in the area of ergonomics, but they are working in very specific area of physiology, or even in psychology. You will see psychologists, but it's more or less a teamwork. When we see or talk about product design or product processes, so it is more like a teamwork. So one may have a physiology expert in the team if required, if that kind of a level of information is required to us. For example, say a car, okay, and we are designing a car, and so we would maybe need to know how much stress is on a person when the seat is in a different position. Maybe a specific person of that area may be employed, but to be a designer, I mean, it's not something that you really have to go get a degree of physiology as such. But yes, you should be aware of it. The background knowledge should be there. That's true.
Right, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, we don't have any other question.
There is one
so
more
I
question here. I can see from Mohit Vora. I think he writes, in Kano method, in Kano model that you explained, the latent feature that you explained is same as the dissatisfier attribute of Kano model, or it's different? See, dissatisfaction also has, I mean, it is a specific area. I mean, dissatisfaction can be on very, very different levels. It can have many different scales a person may have with the product related to dissatisfaction. But the latent need is a little different. It is specifically related to the need that a user has, but when you ask him about that need, or when you're asking him about what he needs in a product, he may not mention that need to the person who's asking this, because that need is not very apparent. It's not very like clear or there as such. Like for example, in the table example that I gave, so we know that the height has to be of some level. The space should be such that I should be able to place my computer, my mouse, my notebooks should fit in there. Uh, but so when I will look at the table, if I'm going to the market to buy it, so I will take a look at all that if it fits my all my requirements. But the footrest, I may or may not. In this case, I had no choice in the table. So when it arrived, it was fine. But when I started to actually use it, then I came to know that, oh, it's really is a problem. It's not letting me put my feet or change my position of my feet, and the blood flow and the whole comfort is being compromised. So latent need is different from dissatisfaction. Okay, not the same thing really. Are there any more questions?
No, ma'am, that's it.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, ma'am. You gave such a deep insight in the role of ergonomics in product innovation. It was indeed it was a session where it dealt with the practical aspect of design. And this is an area of ergonomics which has to be dealt very judiciously while going in for a product innovation. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for giving us such a deep insight into this particular area.
Thank you very much. Although this is just the surface of the iceberg, in the time limit, I mean there is it's a huge area, and but I am glad that I could share some of the points here with you all. And if there are any further questions, please feel free to, contact me and let me know. I would be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.